They say some people vanish because they want to. Others disappear because no one was watching. Daniel Morrow wasn't looking to save anyone. He barely had the strength to save himself. 3 winters after burying his wife, he and his 7-year-old son were just surviving, quietly, steadily, alone. But one night, during a storm cruel enough to tear shingles off rooftops, someone knocked on his barn door. She had no name, no shoes, and no memory of how she got there. What came next wasn't a rescue. It was a reckoning. They say people go to the mountains to find peace. Daniel Morrow had come because he lost his. Montana in late November wasn't gentle. The air cut deep. The wind didn't whisper. It clawed. Snow clung to the sky like it didn't want to come down, and yet it always did. Daniel, now 42, had traded city streets for pine needles and silence. He once taught second-grade math in Austin, wore iron shirts and worried about traffic. Those days felt like another man's life. Now he stacked firewood by hand, repaired what broke, and raised his 7-year-old son, Ollie, alone. It had been 3 years since Ava died, a patch of black ice, no last words, no warning, just a ringing phone, a flattened heartbeat, and then the quiet. Ollie had only been 4 when it happened. He barely remembered her voice now, but sometimes he'd pause at the window when it rained like he was listening for it. Daniel did what he could. Packed them up, left Texas, and returned to Ava's grandfather's cabin. She used to dream of retiring here. Now he was here without her, trying to make something livable out of grief. The cabin stood on the edge of nowhere. No neighbors, just woods and sky. But it gave Daniel what he needed. Fewer questions, fewer reminders, and space to relearn how to breathe. Their days followed a rhythm. Breakfast at 7, schoolwork before lunch, firewood by dusk. Ollie loved to draw, foxes, planets, strange creatures with too many eyes, and Daniel let him. Creativity, at least, was one thing grief hadn't taken from the boy. The night before the storm, Ollie sat cross-legged on the rug, sketching something in charcoal. Daniel watched the fire flicker, his tea untouched on the side table. The radio crackled with warnings. Heavy snowfall, strong winds, whiteout conditions. Typical Montana winter, but something in the air felt different, charged. Daniel checked the generator, secured the windows, and laid out the old quilt at the foot of Ollie's bed. Routine kept things grounded. Ollie looked up suddenly and asked, "Do you think people disappear because they want to?" Daniel hesitated. "Sometimes," he said, "other times the world just lets go of them." He didn't know it yet, but the world wasn't done holding on. And by the next night, someone who had already been forgotten would come knocking. By the next afternoon, Montana was folding in on itself. Clouds sagged low over the tree line like a warning. The air carried a sharpness that bit at the skin, and the wind sounded less like weather and more like a threat. The forecast had undersold it. Again. Daniel moved through the cabin with quiet urgency, checking the flashlight batteries, filling pots with water, setting logs by the fireplace in neat military stacks. He'd done this routine dozens of times, but something about this storm felt different, like it was bringing more than snow. Ollie was quiet too. He wasn't scared, just alert. He stayed close, clutching a sketch pad, drawing something with a red crayon that had worn down to a nub. By 4 o'clock, the wind had started howling. By 5, the snow had turned sideways. Daniel looked out the window and saw the sky closing. In the trees danced wildly, their limbs like frantic arms waving for help. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in under an hour. He stepped outside just before dark to secure the shed. The cold hit him like a slap, dry, immediate, merciless. Snow stung his cheeks as he pulled the latch tight. Then he heard it. At first, it was nothing, just a thump, muffled beneath the gusts. Could have been a loose branch, a falling rake, or snow sloughing off the barn roof. But then it came again. Not a thump. A knock. Daniel turned toward the barn, heart thudding slow but heavy. He waited, staring across the white blur. Nothing moved, just wind and flurries, and the deepening dark. Then a third sound, lighter this time, like knuckles against wood. He didn't run. He didn't call out. He just walked forward, boots crunching against ice-hardened snow, one hand instinctively reaching into his coat for the small flashlight clipped to the inside. The barn loomed ahead, old, faded red paint peeling, like skin. He unlatched the door and pushed it open with a groan. At first there was nothing but shadows. Then the flashlight flickered and caught something in the far corner. Someone, a girl, barefoot, soaked, curled into herself like something already halfway gone. Her hair clung to her face in frozen ropes. Her coat was torn and half open. Her fingers were raw. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She just looked at him with eyes that didn't ask for help. They just expected to be left alone. Daniel didn't ask questions. He moved slowly, shrugging off his own coat and wrapping it around her. She flinched but didn't pull away. Her body was ice. She weighed almost nothing. He didn't carry her so much as gather her. There were no footprints in the snow outside the barn. Back in the cabin, Ollie's eyes widened as he opened the door. Daniel stepped inside, dripping, the girl in his arms. He knelt by the fire and placed her down gently. Her eyes stayed open. He wrapped her in the thick red blanket, Ava's old one, the same one Ollie had retrieved without a word, as if he already knew. The storm screamed against the cabin walls. But inside, everything went still, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like someone had come back from the edge. Even if he didn't know who she was yet, she didn't speak that night. Not a word. Not when Daniel laid her beside the fire. Not when he wrapped her hands in a towel and placed a warm mug of tea in her lap. Not when Ollie, from the hallway, whispered, "Dad, who is she?" Daniel didn't answer, because he didn't know. The girl sat curled beneath the red blanket, arms tight around her knees. Her eyes stayed on the flames, as if they were the only thing keeping her tethered. She had no bag, no gloves, no shoes. Her feet, raw, blew at. The edges were cracked and trembling. He brought out a shallow basin, filled it with warm water and set it down gently. She flinched when her skin touched the surface, not from pain but from memory. Her shoulders tightened, then dropped, as if preparing for something worse that never came. Daniel watched her for a moment, watched how still she became, how quiet. It was the kind of silence that didn't come from shock but training. She'd learned not to make noise, learned not to take up space. He didn't ask who she was, didn't press her for anything. Just tended to her feet, slow and deliberate, like the act itself might convince her she still existed. Ollie hovered nearby, holding his sketch pad like a shield. He didn't speak either, just watched the girl with big, careful eyes. Then he disappeared into the back room and returned with the same thing Daniel hadn't touched in 3 years. Ava's old blanket, the wool one she used to keep in the car for road trips. He held it out like an offering. "She can have this," he said. "If she wants." Daniel looked at him, stunned. Ollie had never let anyone touch that blanket before. Not even Daniel, but the boy simply set it down and stepped back. Daniel wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. She didn't resist. Her fingers clutched the fabric like she recognized it, not the pattern, but the feeling. Something, once, safe. He asked softly, "Is it okay if we call you June, just for now?" She didn't nod, but she didn't shake her head either. Outside, the wind screamed harder. The windows rattled. But inside, time moved differently. Ollie settled in the hallway with a book. Daniel stayed in the armchair, not sleeping, just watching. June, if that was what she would be, drifted in and out. Her eyes blinked slowly, then closed, but her body never relaxed, even in sleep. That kind of tension lives in people who've run too far for too long. People who've had to disappear before someone made them vanish. When the fire popped, she jolted upright. Daniel didn't speak. He just tossed on another log. Eventually, her eyes met his. Not long, not deep, but enough. Enough to know she wasn't just cold. She was hunted, and somehow the storm had dropped her in front of the only man left in that valley who still believed in saving what could be saved. She hadn't brought a name, or shoes, or a story. But she had brought one thing that couldn't be faked, a look that said, "Please, not again." And Daniel, without knowing why, had already decided, He wouldn't let her disappear. The next morning, June was already awake. Or maybe she'd never slept. She sat on the couch where Daniel had left her, the red blanket still wrapped tight around her shoulders, hands buried inside the wool. Her eyes followed the shifting light from the window, like she was tracking something only she could see. Daniel moved quietly, making coffee, pretending not to watch. She didn't move much, didn't ask for anything. She just sat, silent, still, small. When he offered her a warm cup of tea, she reached for it with both hands, held it, didn't sip. Ollie padded out from his room, blinking sleep. He stopped when he saw her still there, then nodded to himself, like that was good, like it meant something. They didn't talk over breakfast, no one tried. The only sound was the wind pushing snow against the cabin walls and the gentle clink of silverware on plates. Daniel noticed the way June sat, spine straight, legs tucked, always close to the blanket. She didn't wear it like a garment, she clung to it like a raft. If she moved from the couch, she kept it draped tight around her. If she shifted from one seat to another, she carried it with her like it was part of her skin. He recognized that instinct. After Ava died, he used to carry her old hoodie in the truck, said it was for the smell of lavender detergent. Truth was, it reminded him what being held once felt like. That was what the blanket was now for her. She hadn't spoken since arriving. Not a name, not a single word, but she listened. Her eyes moved with every sound, the kettle's whistle, the thump of Ollie's footsteps, the distant creak of pine outside. Some people are silent because they don't know what to say. Others are silent because the world once taught them it was safer that way. June's quiet had weight. When she walked barefoot still, her steps were measured, soundless. She avoided corners, never turned her back to a closed door, never lingered too far from the fire. Daniel caught himself holding his breath when she moved, not because he was nervous, but because he didn't want to break whatever fragile thread kept her tethered to the room. That night, after Ollie went to bed, she sat again by the fire. Same spot, same posture. Daniel offered a folded towel for her feet. She nodded, didn't smile but didn't resist. He didn't try to ask anything, not where she came from, not what happened. She wasn't ready to give that part of herself yet. Instead, they sat in quiet. The flames danced. Shadows leaned gently against the walls. The red blanket stayed wrapped around her like a memory that refused to let go. Or maybe, like one she refused to lose. Whatever it was, she needed it. And Daniel didn't question that. Every morning, Daniel made 2 cups of tea. One for himself, black, plain. One for her, with honey and a single sugar cube, exactly how Ava used to drink it. He hadn't asked how June liked her tea. She hadn't said, but the first time he placed the mug in front of her, she wrapped her fingers around it like it was the first warmth she'd felt in months. She drank it slowly, eyes fixed on the rim, never quite finishing the last sip. And every morning since, she accepted the same cup the same way with the same quiet nod. Daniel began to notice things, small, precise behaviors, the way she'd stir her tea just once, clockwise, before lifting the mug, the way she waited until both he and Ollie were seated before she'd touch her food, the way she folded her napkin at the end of every meal, edges perfectly aligned, and placed it on the left side of her plate, never the right. It wasn't habit, it was discipline, control, the kind of control people build when life has taken everything else. June's silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt curated. She moved through the house like someone afraid to wake it. She never opened a drawer without looking over her shoulder, never entered a room without scanning the corners first. When thunder rumbled through the valley one afternoon, she dropped her teacup, shattered it across the floor, then froze waiting like punishment was the next thing coming. It never did. Daniel just swept up the shards and poured her another cup, with honey, and 1 sugar cube. He watched her more closely now, not because he was suspicious, but because something inside him had shifted. Curiosity wasn't the right word. It was something closer to caretaking. She liked to sit near the window mid-morning, even when the snow outside made everything white and blinding. She never pulled the curtain, just stared, like she was reminding herself that beyond the glass the world was still there, and she wasn't in a basement anymore. She hadn't said that. But Daniel knew some pain doesn't need to be confessed. It's written in posture, in breathing, in how someone chooses to place their hands when no one's watching. One afternoon he came back from chopping wood and found her standing at the counter with a jar of honey open, a spoon in her hand. She wasn't eating it, just holding it, like the smell alone was calming her nerves. She saw him, tensed for half a second, then set the jar down carefully. He said nothing. Just poured hot water into 2 mugs, added the honey, the sugar cube, pushed one across the counter toward her. June took it with both hands, stirred once, clockwise. Sipped. She didn't smile, but something behind her eyes shifted, like the wind had blown open a window somewhere deep inside her, and she'd let in just enough light to stay. The power went out just after 9. It started with a flicker, a single blink that made the lamp by the fireplace twitch. Daniel looked up from his book, just in time to see the room plunge into shadow. Then silence. Not the usual kind, but the kind that rearranged your heartbeat. No fridge hum, no boiler, no low radio static, just wind pressing against the cabin. Walls and the soft creak of wood settling into cold. Daniel stood up, calm, practiced. Storm outages were normal up here. He had batteries, candles, backup logs stacked in the hallway. Ollie was already in bed, fast asleep, undisturbed. But June was still sitting on the rug, her back close to the hearth, blanket pulled around her, like armor. In the dark, Daniel could barely see her face, but he could feel her stillness. It was different tonight, not the quiet she lived in daily. This was fear, pure, trained, and waiting. He lit 2 candles and placed one on the low table beside her. The flame illuminated her eyes, wide, locked, glassy. She wasn't looking at the fire. She was somewhere else. Daniel crouched down a few feet away, slow, giving her space. "It's okay," he said. "Just the wind knocking lines down. Happens a lot here." She didn't blink. "I've got the generator in the shed if we need it. You're safe, I promise." Still nothing. Then she spoke. "I used to be locked in a basement," she said, voice thin and flat. The first word she'd spoken in days. Daniel didn't move, didn't even inhale too sharply. "It was always cold," she continued. "Not this kind of cold, not snow, just wet. Like the air came through the pipes. I don't remember what state. Maybe Missouri." She blinked once, stared at the candle like it might judge her. There were no windows. Just one door at the top of the stairs. He kept it locked. I used to count how many steps I heard when he came down. 7 if he was drunk, 10 if he was angry. Daniel stayed quiet. The only sound was the flame. "I wasn't the first," she said. "I found a message scratched into the wood behind the water heater. 3 letters. Run. That was all." Her voice cracked then, not from emotion, but from dryness, from disuse. "I don't know how long I was there. I stopped keeping track after my hair grew past my ribs." He didn't speak much, just brought food, took pictures. Daniel felt his jaw tighten, but he didn't interrupt. She wasn't telling him, she was releasing it. One day he left the door open, just an inch, maybe by mistake. I waited until the 3rd night, then I ran. No shoes, just the coat, just the blanket. I think it belonged to someone else before me. She looked down then at the red wool still wrapped around her shoulders. Her fingers gripped it like it might dissolve. I didn't have a name anymore. I picked one when I reached the woods. June, because it was cold and I wanted to believe in warmth. Daniel exhaled, slow and low. He wanted to say something, anything, but nothing would have been enough. So instead, he said the only true thing left in the room. "You're not there anymore." June turned her head just slightly. Not a nod, but a release. Then she reached forward and moved her candle a little closer to his. Their flames merged for a second, then settled. Outside the wind howled louder, but inside, for the first time since she arrived, the silence wasn't just survival. It was healing. It was 5 days after the storm when the truck pulled up, a beat-up silver Dodge, mud-caked and idling just past the gate. Daniel had been splitting logs out back when he heard it. Engine low, steady, not local. Strangers didn't just stumble into these woods, not unless they were looking for something or someone. He wiped his hands, walked out front. Man stepped from the cab. Late 30s, maybe 40. Clean jacket, crisp jeans, heavy boots too polished for mountain roads. His face wore the kind of smile that came easily to people who lied often. "Hey there," the man said. "Didn't mean to spook you. Just hoping. To ask a quick question." Daniel kept his stance loose, neutral. "Go ahead." The man squinted toward the cabin. "You live here alone?" Daniel didn't answer. The man adjusted his tone, gentler now, almost friendly. "Name's Frank. I'm looking for someone. Young woman. Might have come through here last week. Long brown hair. Wears an old red blanket." He smiled again, but his eyes didn't. Daniel felt his stomach drop. His face stayed calm. "No one's been by," he said evenly. "Snow shut most things down." Frank nodded as if that was expected, but his gaze drifted past Daniel's shoulder toward the front porch, where a coffee mug sat next to a folded blanket on the railing. He noticed. "Too quick to be random." "Well," Frank said, chuckling like they were neighbors talking about weather, "if you do see someone, tell her Frank stopped by. She's not in trouble, just worried folks missing her back home." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a photo. Folded. Worn. It was June, smiling, standing in front of what looked like a gas station. Hair cleaner, eyes brighter, younger. Frank extended it. "She goes by different names, doesn't talk much, gets confused sometimes. We're just trying to get her somewhere safe." Daniel didn't take the photo, just studied it, then looked at Frank, really looked. His smile was too smooth, his body too still. This wasn't someone searching. This was someone tracking. Daniel finally spoke. "If I see her, I'll let you know." Frank held the silence a beat longer than necessary, then nodded, slipping the photo back into his coat. "Much obliged." He turned toward the truck, opened the door, paused. "You've got a good setup out here," he said. "Nice and quiet. But quiet's funny, ain't it? Sometimes it lets the wrong things in." Then he climbed in and drove away. Daniel didn't watch him disappear down the trail. He turned straight back toward the house, heart hammering harder than it had during any storm. He opened the front door. June was gone from the couch, not out. Of fear. Not hiding. She was standing in the kitchen, fists clenched around the edge of the counter, knuckles white. She'd heard the voice. She remembered it. She didn't need to say a word. Daniel stepped beside her. "He won't come through that door unless we let him." She didn't nod, but her breathing steadied. The red blanket was back around her shoulders, and this time it looked like armor. The next morning the truck came back. This time Daniel was ready. He'd parked the snowplow across the lower trail, locking the tires, left the gate half open on purpose to test the man's confidence. And, as expected, Frank drove right in. Daniel stood on the porch with his hands in his coat pockets. Frank stepped out, same casual smile, same two clean boots. "Morning," Frank said, like yesterday hadn't happened. "Thought I'd swing by again. Got turned around a bit up north. Figured I'd check in before heading out." Daniel didn't answer. Just let the silence do the talking. Frank looked toward the cabin, then back at Daniel. "Mind if I come in for a minute? Just to warm up. Snow's biting this morning." Daniel's tone was flat. "I do mind." Frank held the pause, smiled wider. "Look, man, I know how this looks. You think I'm dangerous, that she's some kind of victim. But the truth's a little less dramatic." He stepped closer. "She ran away from a group. Home. The blanket. It's from there. So's the coat. We've had to bring her back before. You know how trauma works. Makes people see monsters where there aren't any." Daniel tilted his head. "And you're what? A social worker?" Frank laughed softly. "Something like that." Inside the cabin, behind the curtain, June stood frozen near the hallway door. She hadn't moved since the engine started outside. Her hands were clenched. The tea on the table untouched. She could hear everything. Daniel saw her shadow shift slightly, just enough to catch his eye. It wasn't fear this time. It was fury. "I'm going to ask you one time," Daniel said, stepping down a single stair. "Why are there no missing persons bulletins? Why is there no badge in your wallet? Why do you keep coming back alone?" Frank's smile twitched. A crack. Then, "Because not everything official stays on paper, friend. Some things stay." "Clean her off the books." Daniel's jaw tightened. His voice lowered. "She doesn't want to go with you." Frank raised both hands like he was defusing a bomb. "She's not well. She gets confused. Builds stories. She's done it before. She told me about the basement." That stopped him. For the first time, Frank's face shifted, barely but enough. Like someone had stepped on the edge of his shadow. "You believe that?" he asked. "You just take her word." "I believe what the body remembers," Daniel said, "and hers remembers everything." They stood there for a long second. Snow falling between them, the air brittle. Frank exhaled slowly. "All right, you've made up your mind, but I'll tell you something, Daniel. You don't know her, you don't know what she's done. She doesn't owe me perfect," Daniel said. "She just deserves safe." Frank looked at him like he was both impressed and annoyed. Then he turned, stepped back into his truck, and drove away. Inside, June dropped to the floor, back against the wall. She wasn't crying, wasn't shaking, just breathing hard. Eyes wide open, like someone who'd just watched a nightmare get talked down without a single scream. Daniel stepped in quietly and set the mug of tea in front of her, still warm, still with honey. She didn't speak, but for the first time she reached out with both hands, no blanket, no barrier, and drank it. Frank came back one last time. But this time he wasn't smiling. He didn't park by the gate. He drove straight, his tires crunching over fresh snow like he owned the place. Daniel heard the engine before he saw the truck. He stood from the workbench, wiped grease from his hands, and stepped out into the morning air. Frank slammed the truck door harder than necessary. His coat flapped open. He wasn't pretending anymore. "I'm done playing nice," he said. "You're harboring someone who doesn't belong here. And if I have to drag her out myself—" He didn't finish, because that's when two sheriff's vehicles pulled into the clearing behind him. It hadn't been easy. Daniel had spent the last 2 days calling in favors, quietly emailing a contact from his teaching days who now worked in victim advocacy. He'd submitted the picture Frank had shown him, along with dashcam footage from the trail camera Daniel had installed on a whim 2 years ago. Turns out, Frank wasn't a ghost. He had a record sealed tight in 2 counties, and an active warrant. Misdemeanor. Charges, nothing flashy, but enough. Frank turned as the deputies stepped out, hands low, calm but certain. "Sir," one of them said, "we need you to step away from the vehicle." Frank's laugh was dry and empty. "You've got no idea what she is," he spat, eyes on Daniel. "You think you're saving someone. She'll rot you from the inside." Daniel didn't respond. He just watched as they cuffed him. Frank didn't resist. But his eyes never left Daniel's face, not even when they pushed his head gently into the back seat. "Ask her what she did," Frank muttered, just loud enough. "Bet she never told you that part." Daniel stood in the snow long after the cars drove away. The wind had stopped. The woods were still. Inside, June had seen everything. She sat on the floor near the fireplace, knees pulled to her chest, not hiding, just waiting. Daniel didn't come to her. He didn't speak. He just opened the door wide and said quietly, "You can go, if you want." He's gone. June didn't move for a long time. Then she stood, stepped out of the blanket, walked past him, barefoot, on the wooden planks, through the doorway and onto the porch. The cold hit her face. She squinted at the sun. Snow fell gently around her, softer now. Daniel stayed behind her, still as stone. She walked 5 paces forward, stopped, and then, slowly, she turned around, not fast. Not dramatic, just a quiet pivot, like someone choosing something real. She stepped back toward him, re-wrapped the blanket over her shoulders, and sat down on the porch steps. Not saying she'd stay, not saying she trusted him, but saying enough, and... Daniel, without a word, sat beside her. No questions, no promises, just 2 people breathing in the cold, with nothing left to run from. The house felt different, not louder, still quiet, but warmer somehow. There was steam on the windows in the mornings, and the scent of honey in the kitchen before anyone spoke. Ollie laughed more. He'd started reading aloud again, Books about explorers, stars, wolves with names. June never joined him, but she listened. Daniel could tell. Her hands paused when he read the funny parts. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly when the stories ended in light. Even the silence between her and Daniel had softened. It no longer felt like a wall. More like a hallway. Narrow, yes, but leading somewhere. She helped with little things. Stacking. Firewood. Washing cups. Feeding the chickens. One morning, Daniel found his old toolbox organized into sections. No one mentioned it. But he tightened the hinge on her window later that day without being asked. Still, she hadn't unpacked. Her shoes stayed by the door, not tucked in a corner, but angled out, ready. She folded the red blanket every night before bed, not like someone storing a comfort item. Like someone preparing for departure, Daniel noticed. He didn't ask, but he noticed. There was no more talk of Frank, no more knocking on the gate. The sheriff's office confirmed he'd been extradited across state lines. No bail, a few older. Cases reopened, not enough to make national news, just enough to make June safe again. But safety didn't erase instinct. Daniel caught her checking the locks twice one evening. He'd already checked them. She checked again anyway. Not paranoid, precise, like someone keeping a promise to herself. One afternoon, he found her by the mailbox, not looking for letters, just standing, staring down the trail like she was measuring. She didn't flinch when he approached. She didn't speak either. He didn't push. That night, while Ollie slept, Daniel stood at the kitchen window. June sat on the porch steps with her knees drawn up, and the blanket loose around her. She looked small but not broken, still stitched together by willpower and silence. Daniel poured 2 mugs of tea, 1 black, 1 honey, 1 sugar cube. He handed it to her without a word. She took it, held it with both hands, and then softly, "I don't think I'm meant to stay anywhere." It wasn't dramatic, just a truth she'd carried so long it no longer hurt to say. Daniel looked out into the dark woods. Then said quietly, "Then stay as long as it feels true." She nodded, barely, but she drank the tea. All of it this time. Even the last sip. It happened by accident. Daniel had stepped out to the shed, only for a few minutes. The kettle was still, warm on the stove. Ollie had been in the living room, drawing. June was at the table, folding something, one of Daniel's old shirts she'd washed and pressed, without being asked. When Daniel returned, the house was silent. But it wasn't the usual kind of quiet. It was frozen, heavy. Ollie stood by the table, his sketchpad clutched tight, his eyes wide, not scared, not angry, just startled. June sat motionless in the chair. Her hands were still on the shirt, but her face had lost all color. The red blanket was pooled on the floor by her feet. She hadn't picked it up. Daniel paused at the door, instinctively reading the air like a hunter stepping into a clearing. "What happened?" he asked, soft. Ollie looked at June, then at his dad. "I just asked her name," he said. "Her real one." Daniel glanced at June. She wasn't crying, not at first. She just stared forward, lips parted like she'd been caught mid-breath. Then her shoulders began to shake. No sound, just movement. A kind of silent collapse, like a house caving inward without a single crack. Ollie stepped back, frightened by the suddenness of it. Daniel crossed the room in 2 strides. He knelt down beside her, not touching her, just there. "She didn't do anything wrong," Ollie whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt her." Daniel rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "You didn't," he said. "You were kind. That's all." But June had folded in on herself. Her hands covered her mouth, eyes squeezed shut like she was trying to erase herself from the room. "I don't want to be her," she gasped. The first real words in days. "I don't want to go back." Daniel looked at her gently. "Then don't." "I don't want to remember that girl," she said. "The one with his last name, the one who waited, who begged." Daniel didn't correct her, didn't pull her back into coherence. He let the words spill because he knew the cost of silence. Held too long. "I thought if I didn't speak her name," she said, "he couldn't find me." Her voice cracked on the last word. Find me, and there it was, the terror, naked and human. Ollie stepped forward, quiet but brave. He reached into his sketchpad and tore out a page, handed it to her with small fingers. A drawing, 3 stick figures, one tall man, one smaller woman with long hair and a red square over her shoulders, a child with wild curls, all holding hands. Under a pine tree, June stared at it, then broke. Not violently, not loudly, but completely. She covered her face and wept, not like someone afraid of being punished, but like someone finally allowed to grieve, allowed to stop pretending she didn't need saving. Daniel didn't try to fix it. He just sat there. And Ollie, with the quiet wisdom of children who've known loss, leaned gently against her side and said, "It's okay if you don't want to tell us, but you don't have to lie to yourself." And somehow, that was the moment. The air shifted. The next morning she asked for a shovel. Daniel didn't ask why. He just handed it to her. The sun had finally returned after 3 weeks of clouds. Light fell soft through the pine trees, and the snow was beginning to melt in slow patches along the trail. The ground was still hard, but not frozen. June walked. Past the chicken coop, past the woodpile to a small clearing just beyond the fence. Daniel watched her from the porch, not hovering, just aware. She wore boots now, and the red blanket wasn't wrapped around her shoulders. It was folded in her arms, resting like something remembered, not something needed. She stopped near the roots of a tall pine, cleared the slush with her boot, and began to dig. Not deep, just enough. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small, creased slip of paper. Daniel recognized it instantly, though he'd never seen it in her hands before. The word was scratched in jagged lines, run the message she once found behind the water heater in the basement, the word that gave her permission to survive. A word that kept her moving long after her name had gone silent. She stared at it for a long moment, then placed it into the shallow earth, pressed it down gently. Not like trash. Like a memory. Then she filled the hole, smoothed the dirt with her palms, and laid a small flat stone on top. She didn't cry. She just stood, wiped her hands, looked back toward the cabin. Daniel was still on the porch, a mug of tea in his hands. He didn't wave, didn't speak. He just waited like he had since the beginning. June walked back slowly. When she reached the steps, she didn't sit. She opened the screen door, stepped inside, hung the red blanket on the hook by the entry, and, for the first time, she took off her shoes, not to run, but to stay. Spring came slowly to Montana, not in a rush of flowers, but in small, stubborn acts, mud where snow had been, robins scratching at thawed soil, and the first green shoot pushing. Through the herb bed by the porch. And June. June began to move differently. She woke earlier, tied her hair back with a strip of flannel. She started baking, not from a recipe book, but from memory, like her hands had been waiting for something to do that didn't involve hiding. The first time, it was banana bread. Too dark on the edges, soft in the middle. Ollie ate 3 pieces anyway. The second time, it was cinnamon rolls. Not perfect spirals, but warm. Honest. The kitchen smelled like something Daniel hadn't realized he missed. She planted herbs, basil, rosemary, a row of chives, dug out space for carrots, even tried tomatoes, though the elevation made them temperamental. She didn't talk much while working, but she hummed sometimes, quiet, half melodies with no words, and she laughed once, when Ollie spilled compost on his shoes, not loud. Just enough for Daniel to turn from the sink and catch it before it vanished. She wrote lists, pinned them on the fridge, things to try, things to fix, things they might grow next season. The word "we" started appearing in her handwriting. Daniel didn't point it out. He just started building a second garden bed beside hers. At dinner she reached for seconds. At breakfast she offered to make the tea. One morning Daniel opened the pantry and found a tin labeled "for winter" in June's handwriting. Inside were dried rosemary, jarred peach jam, and 3 perfectly wrapped bundles of sourdough starter. She was building a future, one sealed jar at a time, and Daniel quietly let her. The idea came one morning over pancakes. Ollie had just finished telling a story about a fox that wore glasses, and June was halfway through washing dishes when she paused, glanced at Daniel and asked, like someone testing the ground beneath their feet, What would I need to get papers? Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at her hands, wet, soapy, steady, not trembling. He set down his coffee mug. You mean legal ID? She nodded once. Something real. Not what he gave me. Not what I ran from. Daniel studied her face. There was no panic in her eyes. Just resolve. Like someone tired of floating and finally ready to plant their feet somewhere solid. It took 2 weeks to arrange, a drive downstate, 3 phone calls with a victim advocate, quiet help from a retired sheriff who owed Daniel a favor and didn't ask questions. They used what they could. Hospital notes from the night of the storm, Daniel's statement, the sealed report from Frank's arrest. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fast. But it moved forward. On the 3rd visit to the courthouse, a clerk finally slid a form across the desk and asked, almost too casually, "Name you'd like to register?" June didn't look at Daniel. She didn't hesitate. She picked up the pen, steady as stone, and wrote 2 words, Hope Whitmore. The room went still for Daniel, not from surprise, but from the sheer weight of it. The name hung in the air like a bell note that refused to fade. Hope, because she'd survived what should have erased her. Whitmore, because she had chosen more than fear, more than silence, more than memory. The clerk, unaware of the quake those 2 words had triggered, just nodded and typed it into the system. Daniel looked at her, not like a savior, not like a protector, just like a man who'd been trusted with witnessing the beginning of something. "You sure?" he asked quietly later, outside by the bench under the courthouse oak. June, no, Hope, nodded. "It's not who I was," she said. "It's who I want to be when I walk into a room." She folded the temporary ID into her wallet, like it was fragile. Her fingers touched the edge with care, not possession, like something sacred. That night at the cabin, Ollie asked if they should still call her June. Hope looked at him and smiled. Just enough. "You can," she said. "But I'll write Hope on my jars from now on." Ollie thought about it. "Can I call you both?" Hope shrugged. "Guess that makes you the first person who gets to know both halves." They left it at that. Later, when the house was dark and only firelight moved across the ceiling, Daniel sat in his chair, a cup of tea cooling in his hand. Hope was at the table, writing something in her journal. Her hair loose, her feet bare against the floorboards. She looked like someone who had never been underground, like someone who'd been born in the morning. And Daniel, he didn't say it aloud, but he felt it fully. Some people run, some hide, but some rebuild. And when they do, they don't take back the name they had. They choose the one that will carry them forward. It was a Thursday, the kind of slow, honest afternoon where bread dough rose on the windowsill and Ollie sat on the porch reading, upside down. Daniel was in the shed sharpening a blade. The radio buzzed low beside him, playing a Johnny Cash song Hope had started humming lately. Then Ollie called out, not loud, not afraid. "Just curious, Dad? There's a man out front." Daniel stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. And there he was. A man standing just beyond the fence, one hand resting on the gate, mid-60s, maybe older. Weathered face, grey hair tucked under a faded baseball cap, clean flannel, work boots that had known gravel and time. He wasn't armed, he wasn't fidgeting, he just waited. Daniel approached with measured steps. "Can I help you?" The man looked up, eyes steady. "I'm looking for my daughter," he said. "She might be living here or nearby." Daniel stiffened. "Who are you?" The man took a breath like someone pulling open a wound. "Walter Keene, from Wyoming. I've been looking a long time." Daniel didn't reply. But inside the cabin, Hope must have heard, because the door creaked open. She stepped out onto the porch, apron still tied, flour dusted on her arms. The man turned slowly. When he saw her, something inside him folded. "Sweet pea," he said. Hope froze. Not like before, not the hunted stillness Daniel had come to know. This was different. This was recognition colliding with disbelief. She didn't speak, didn't move. Daniel glanced at her, but didn't step between them. He just waited. Walter cleared his throat. "I saw the name change on the registry, Hope Whitmore." It felt like something she'd do. And Montana was always her mother's dream. Hope's voice, when it came, was flat. I thought, "You were dead." Walter blinked. "No, but I was too damn drunk to notice when you needed me most. Your mother, she tried. I didn't. And by the time I woke up, you were already gone." No one spoke for a long time. The wind moved through the pine like it was listening. "I'm not here to take anything from you," Walter said, voice cracking now. I wanted to see you with my own eyes, to say I'm sorry, to say you don't have to disappear anymore." Hope didn't cry, but she stepped off the porch, slowly, carefully. She didn't hug him. She didn't run. She just stood 5 feet away and looked her father in the eye, and in that quiet something passed between them. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Daniel stayed by the door, heart steady. He knew she wasn't ready, but he also knew she hadn't gone back inside, not yet, and that meant something. That evening, Daniel lit a fire in the stove, even though it wasn't cold, not for heat, for grounding. Walter sat in the chair by the window, shoulders hunched like someone waiting for a verdict. Hope didn't sit. She stood near the sink, arms crossed, weight shifted to one side, a stance that said, "I'll hear you, but I won't make this easy." Daniel stayed nearby, but not between them. This wasn't his war to referee. Walter cleared his throat. "Your mother passed 3 years ago, cancer, fast. She kept your picture in her wallet until the end." Hope stared at the tile. "She called you 10 times the night I disappeared. You didn't answer." "I was in Cheyenne, drunk. Didn't check my phone." Hope's voice was flat. "So you didn't even know I was gone?" "I didn't, until the police showed up." Silence filled the space between the words, the kind of silence that didn't ask for comfort. "I sobered up," Walter said quietly. "Eventually. But I kept thinking, if I found you too soon, it'd just make things worse. I didn't want to come back into your life as the same man who let you disappear." Hope's jaw tightened. She didn't cry. "You were never in my life to begin with," Walter nodded. Didn't argue. "I kept running," he said, "looking sometimes, but also avoiding. I thought maybe you were safer without me, that maybe I'd only add more wreckage." Hope finally looked at him. "You think showing up now undoes any of that?" "No," he said softly. "I think showing up now is the least I owe you." Daniel watched her eyes shift, just barely. A flicker of something that wasn't forgiveness, but wasn't fury either. The place in between, the part that just wanted answers. She walked over to the table, sat down across from him. "You hit her," she said. "Not every day. But when it got bad," Walter blinked. "Yes." "And me?" He took a long breath. "Once. And I've never stopped hating myself for it." Hope didn't flinch. "You don't get points for honesty." "I know." She stared at the table, at the grain in the wood, as if memory were etched there. "Do you want something?" she asked. "Money? Redemption? Permission to sleep better?" "No," Walter said. "I just wanted to meet the woman you became." That broke something in the air. Not between them, between her and herself, because for the first time someone had acknowledged she'd become. Not survived, not escaped, became. She leaned back, folded her arms tighter. "I don't forgive you," she said. "Not now. Maybe not ever," Walter nodded. "But I won't tell you to leave either," she added. "You can stay tonight, you'll eat at my table, you'll speak when spoken to, and in the morning, we'll see how it feels." Walter's shoulders sank, not in defeat but in understanding. He hadn't come expecting a door, but now he had a chair, and sometimes that was enough. Daniel refilled the kettle. The stove hissed softly. No one smiled, no music played, no strings swelled, but there, in the flicker of firelight and old regret, something patient took root. Not reconciliation, but recognition. It was just a fall, a stupid one. Daniel had been up on the shed roof clearing branches after a windstorm. The ladder shifted, just an inch, and that was enough. He landed wrong on his side, shoulder first. Nothing. Broken but badly bruised. Enough to knock the breath out of him, and make the next 48 hours a slow crawl of pain and pride. Hope found him half sitting against the shed wall, trying to pretend he wasn't seeing stars. She didn't ask what happened. She just crouched beside him and said, "Can you walk?" He nodded. Lied. She helped him up anyway. Inside, Ollie fetched the ice pack. Hope grabbed the first aid kit. Daniel tried to wave them both off, but his breath caught mid-chuckle and he nearly blacked out, so he let her help. She moved quietly, cleaned the scrape on his arm with gentle pressure, loosened the buttons on his shirt to check the bruising. Her fingers were steady, her face unreadable. "You could have broken your ribs," she said. "Or your neck," Daniel grunted. "I've done dumber things." She didn't smile. "Why were you alone up there?" He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. She already knew. The habit of doing things alone is hard to break. When the bandages were done, she brought him tea. Sat with him at the table while he leaned stiffly in the chair, shifting now and then like someone trying to hide pain from a mirror. "You don't have to do everything by yourself," she said quietly. He looked at her. "You're one to talk." That earned the faintest flicker of a smile. They sat like that for a while, him bruised, her folded into the chair across from him. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, just suspended. Then she spoke, not loudly. "When I was in the basement, I used to imagine someone like you. Not perfect. Just quiet, steady. Who didn't try to fix me. Just stayed." Daniel's throat tightened. He didn't respond right away, but he reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Her fingers curled into his, slow, unsure, but willing. "I'm still learning," he said, "how to let people in. I'm still learning how not to run." He nodded. "We're a pair, huh?" She let out a breath, half laugh, half release. They didn't say the word love, not yet, but it was there, quiet and honest, in the way. She filled his glass without asking, in the way he reached for her hand again before standing, and in the way neither of them looked toward the door. Because for once, neither of them needed to leave. The storm passed overnight. By morning, the sky was clear, pale blue, and everything outside shimmered with frost. The world looked clean, like it had been rinsed of memory. Daniel was sitting by the fire, his shoulder still sore but manageable. A quiet ache, one he'd grown used to. Hope stepped out of the bedroom with 2 mugs of tea, no apron, no blanket. Just her, barefoot, calm and present. She handed him a cup and sat beside him on the floor. Not across from him, not guarded, beside. For a while neither spoke. The fire cracked softly. Ollie's soft breathing drifted in from the hallway. Daniel stared into the flames, voice low. "I used to think I was meant to be alone. After Ava died, like there was only so much closeness I was built for." Hope didn't answer, just waited. "But then you showed up," he said, "and everything in me wanted to pull back, to protect what was left. But I didn't." He looked down at the mug in his hands, then at her. "I don't know what this is, I just know I want it to stay." Hope turned to him. Her eyes weren't wide or watery, they were steady. He didn't reach for her, just said it, plain and certain. "Stay. With me, not for a week, not until it feels easier, just stay for good." There was no music, no cue, just air and breath and firelight. Hope set her mug down, leaned in, pressed her forehead gently against his. "I was already staying," she whispered. Then, quieter, "But it's nice to be asked." She didn't need saving anymore. And he didn't need fixing. They just chose each other. In a room that no longer echoed. The letter came on a Wednesday, thick envelope, county return address, legal tone. Daniel opened it at the kitchen counter while Hope was outside feeding the hens. His eyes skimmed the first lines, then stopped cold. Frank Whitmore had filed an appeal. New lawyer. Technical error in the original warrant. A court date. No set release, but enough movement to stir the mud again. By the time Hope came in, he was already folding the letter shut. She saw his face before she saw the envelope. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. "There's news about—" "Frank?" She stood still. "He's not out," Daniel said quickly. "Not yet, but he's appealing. The system, it's trying to give him a second window. Hope didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. Will they call me to testify? Possibly, Daniel said, but you don't have to. Not this time. She raised an eyebrow. He's contesting everything. If I don't speak, who will? Daniel stepped forward. Hope, look at me. You've rebuilt everything. You don't owe him another breath. I'm not doing it for him, she said, voice firm. I'm doing it for the ones after me. Daniel's hands clenched slightly. Not from anger, from fear. You already faced him once, he said. You don't need to bleed again for a room full of strangers who might not believe you. Hope was quiet. Not because she agreed, because she understood where his fear came from. Then she said gently, You're not asking me to stay quiet. For me. You're asking me to stay safe for you. Daniel closed his eyes. She was right. I'm scared, he admitted. I can't lose you. Not now. Not like that. Hope took his hand, pressed it to her chest. You won't, she said, but I won't disappear to make you feel safer. I did that once already. I lost too much. She wasn't angry. She wasn't reckless. She was clear. Daniel didn't argue. He just nodded. Because love meant holding space, even when it terrified you. The courthouse smelled like old wood and copy paper. Daniel sat in the second row, hands folded tight in his lap. He'd offered to stay outside. Hope had said no. If I'm walking into that room, she told him, you're sitting where I can see you, and so he sat, watching her step through the double doors, back straight, eyes calm. She wore no makeup, no mask, just a deep green. Sweater and boots still flecked with soil from the garden. Her hair was pinned, not styled. She looked like herself. Fully. Frank sat at the defense table in a grey suit that didn't fit him. His lawyer whispered something, and he nodded without looking up. He hadn't seen her in over a year until now. She took the stand without hesitation. The courtroom was quiet. Not reverent. Tense. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth. Sat down. The prosecutor began gently. Can you state your name for the record? She took a breath. Hope Whitmore. Daniel saw the ripple move through the courtroom. No one expected that name. Not the court clerk, not the stenographer, not Frank. Hope looked at the jury, not the prosecutor. She wasn't trying to perform. She was telling her story. The questions were standard at first. How did she know the defendant? When did she last live with him? What circumstances led to her disappearance? Then the harder ones came. What do you remember from the basement? Her voice didn't break. I remember it was always cold, she said. Even in summer. I remember I wasn't allowed upstairs when he had guests. I remember the bucket in the corner, the locks on both sides of the door. She didn't cry. She didn't pause for sympathy. She delivered each fact like a brick. She told them about the scratches on the underside of the bed frame, her own fingernails, the piece of mirror she'd hidden inside her sock, the day she carved "Run" behind the water heater in case someone, anyone, found. And then she turned to face Frank. He told me if I ever left, no one would believe me. He said I was broken, that I wasn't even worth naming, so I stopped speaking. Her eyes didn't leave Frank's face. But the thing he never understood is silence isn't surrender. It's survival. Frank didn't react. Hope continued, her voice low but sharp. I'm not here to make him hurt. I'm here because someone else might be where I was, in a room, with no light, with no name. Daniel couldn't breathe, not from fear. From awe. She wasn't testifying, she was reclaiming. The defense attorney cross-examined her, tried to shake her. Isn't it true you stayed for over a year without trying to escape? Yes, she said, that's what trauma looks like. You. To never called the police. I didn't know if they'd take me back to him. You changed your name, why? To become someone he couldn't erase. The lawyer tried to find an angle, but there were no cracks in her answers. Just the truth. Unapologetic. Unflinching. When it was over, Hope stepped down, walked back past Daniel without needing his hand. She sat, exhaled. Outside, during recess, Daniel brought her a bottle of water. She took it, her fingers brushing his. Didn't shake, she said softly. Not once. He nodded. I know. She looked at him, really looked. "You stayed with me through all of it," she said, "even when I didn't want to stay with myself." Daniel didn't speak, just wrapped his coat tighter around her shoulders. The green sweater peeked out underneath like the first signs of spring. She didn't need saving, not anymore, but she let herself be held, and that for the first time felt like peace. The verdict came in quiet. No cameras, no media storm, just 12 jurors, one judge, and a clear decision. Frank Whitmore's appeal was denied, indefinitely. He'd never walk. Free again, Hope didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She simply closed her eyes in the hallway, let out a long breath and whispered, "Done." Daniel didn't ask how she felt. He knew. It wasn't joy. It wasn't revenge. It was gravity leaving the chest after years of carrying someone else's weight. They drove back through the mountain roads in silence, Ollie asleep in the back seat. The sun dipped low, gold through the trees. The cabin waited with its steady roof and messy porch and warm windows. Hope didn't go inside. Instead, she walked straight to the patch of soil by the fence, the one she'd cleared weeks ago, where nothing had grown yet, but the earth was soft, ready. Daniel followed her, confused at first, until she opened the paper bag she'd brought. Inside was a sapling, apple. She knelt, pressed fingers into the dirt, dug the hole with care, not rushed, not symbolic. Real. Daniel stood beside her as she planted the tree, covered the roots, patted the ground flat, watered it with the same old metal can she used for her herbs. Then, she sat back, palms dirty, cheeks flushed. "That's the last thing I needed to do," she said. Daniel crouched beside her. "For what?" "To stay." He didn't answer right away. He looked at the sapling swaying slightly in the breeze, then at her, stronger, softer, and entirely her own. "You're sure?" "I put a tree in the ground," she said. "That's more permanent than a name change." He smiled barely. "You know it'll take years to fruit." "I'm not going anywhere." She leaned into his side. Not dramatically, not like a declaration. Like someone who'd finally chosen to exhale where she stood. Inside, Ollie stirred awake. Outside, the first stars blinked through the dusk. The cabin stood behind them, quiet, lived in, imperfect, and in front of them, a tree no one could uproot. Not anymore. The poem showed up one morning taped to the fridge, written in Ollie's crooked handwriting on lined paper, the kind pulled from a school notebook with the jagged edge still attached. Daniel found it while making coffee. Read it twice before Hope walked in, rubbing her eyes. He didn't say anything. Just stepped aside. She read it. Slowly, at the top, Ollie had written, "For the lady who stayed," and beneath, in careful, uneven lines, "You didn't come here with a suitcase, or a name that fit right. You came like a whisper after thunder, and stayed like morning light. You don't say much, but I hear everything. Even the silence that sounds like safety, even the steps that never run." Hope didn't speak, but her hand went to her heart. Soft, quiet. Daniel folded the paper, placed it gently into the drawer by the stove, where they kept the good matches, the old photos, and now a poem from a child who'd seen more than he should have, but still believed in people who chose to stay. Outside, the apple tree held steady in the spring breeze. Inside, no one had to run anymore, and that, Daniel thought, was the whole point of building a home.